Okay, Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
We're running a little late tonight. Okay, this week we're in Genesis chapter 18. And it's Genesis 18:1 through 22:24. And if you're reading the half-Torah portions, it's 2 Kings 4:1 through 23. Luke 17:26 through 37. Romans 4:13 through 25, chapter 9, 6 through 9, and Hebrews 11:13 through 19. All them.
Slower.
This is Vayera, and Vayera in Hebrew means or, and he appeared, or it means he showed himself. And out of that Hebrew word, you can get the name Ro'eh. It's R-A-H-A, which means to see or to look at. Also out of that word would come Reuben, which means behold the sun. So you've got wilderness, you've got a whole bunch of things that out of that, and you can change that word all around by adding in Hebrew vowel points, which is your little dots and dashes and pluses that go under the letters. Chapter 18, let's look at verses 1 through 8. It says, Hashem appeared to him in the plains of Mamre while they were sitting at the entrance of the tent in the heat of the day. He lifted up his eyes and saw, and behold, 3 men were standing over him. He perceived, so he ran toward them from the entrance of the tent and bowed toward the ground. And he said, My Lord, if I find favor in your eyes, please pass not away from your servant. Let some water be brought, and wash your feet, and recline beneath the tree. I will fetch a morsel of bread, that you may sustain yourself, then go on, inasmuch as you have passed your servant's way. They said, Do so, just as you have said. So Abraham hastened to the tents to Sarah, and said, Hurry, 3 seahs of meal, fine flour. Knead and make cakes. Then Abraham ran to the cattle, took a calf tender and good, and gave it to the youth, who hurried to prepare it. He took cream and milk and the calf which he had prepared, and placed these before him. He stood over them beneath the tree, and they ate. And so here you've got Mamre, which means strength or fatness. Mamre today is modern day Hebron. That's what you're looking at when you see that. If you remember in the text last week that we found Abraham was camped at the Tenebreth trees in Mamre. So Tenebreth, is alone. It's A-L-O-N. And it means a great tree. So it comes from the root word Elo, or an Elohim, meaning mighty. So you get the meaning of this tree as people, because trees in the Bible usually relate to people as righteous and upright. So Mamre in Hebrew is 2 mems, a resh and an aleph, and it means strength. So here we find in these first 8 verses, Abraham is sitting at the entrance to his tent. 2 times we find the phrase entrance to his tent. Remember a couple lessons ago that we found out that tent is a Hebrew idiom, meaning, to walk and teaching and instructions of the Torah. So tent is what the dwelling places for the people would be that when they set up the tabernacle in the wilderness. Tent, you're going to find as it moves along in Exodus, is going to become known as O-L, O-H-E-L. So Abraham, he sees these 3 men standing over him. He ran toward them and said, My Lord, if I find favor in your eyes, please pass not away from your servant. Let some water be brought, and wash your feet, and recline beneath the tree. I will fetch a morsel of bread, that you may sustain yourselves, and then go as much as you have passed your servant this way. They said, Do so, just as you have heard. So Abraham tells Sarah to make cakes, with 3 measures of fine meal. That would be leaven. He went and got, or unleavened. He went and got a young calf, which he prepared. A calf in the Strong's is bane. It's B-A-N. And it means the young of an animal. Tender, it means it's delicate. And good is tov. How good it is, tov. Good, pleasant, agreeable, that's what tov means. So he takes butter and milk, and he sets it before, for these men while they ate. Why is it so important to offer the calf cakes, milk, and butter? I mean, they didn't have to put that in there. They could just say, oh, we fed them a good meal. But they put this in here. This is an offering in Hebrew known as the Korban offering.
Oh, it's a Corbin.
Yeah, and you're going to find that again when we get into the offerings in Exodus and Leviticus. And Korban means drawing near. So again, you're going to see that in Leviticus. So, this is what Abraham gave the best, is what he had, to the butter. From the calf to the butter, it's all the best. Genesis 18:9 through 15, it was during this meal that Abraham asked, during this meal that they asked, is Abraham, where is your wife, Sarah? Abraham told him that she was in the tent. Remember again, the tent's the idiom. You got to, sort of think about this when you're reading these scriptures. So Sarah was in the tent, means she was keeping Torah, or God's principles. The men then tell Abraham that next year Sarah would have a son, to which Sarah would laugh as she was standing at the entrance to the tent. She's going to hear everything that was going on that the men had to say. Sarah laughed when she heard it, and she said then, when questioned about her laughing, she denied it. So, to put it bluntly, she lied. That's what she did, she lied.
Why lie? I mean, she laughed, she laughed.
It's like, why do people lie? To protect themselves. Number one, they protect themselves. Two, because they're afraid. They don't want people to think they're stupid. There's a whole bunch of things. They just lie. They don't want people to see that they're failed in something, or for other reasons. That's why people lie. Ultimately, what's done in the dark comes to the light. So you can lie all you want, but eventually it's going to come around and smack you. You're going to get it right back. So from that point on, the men leave to go to Sodom and Gomorrah because the outcry was great. So they left. Abraham was moved with compassion, asked Yahweh to save the city, for 50 people, if you could just find 50 righteous people. 50 is Yovel, it's Jubilee. And then it's a numerical value of a nun, which means heir to the throne. Then when that didn't work, the second time he asked for 45 people. 45 people is 5 less than 50. And the Hebrew letters He, meaning revelation. So 45 is the numerical value for man, and 40 is, of course, your trials and testings. That didn't work. Third time, he said, well, how about 30 people? If I can just get 30 people. 30 is Hebrew for lamen and means the shepherd's staff. Went from that to the fourth time to 20 people. 20 is the Hebrew letter Kaf, meaning palm of the hand. And the last time he's going to ask for 10 people. 10 people. 10 is Yud, it means hand. In the book of Yasher, which we talked about again last week, I wrote this out because I thought it was interesting again too. It says, Sodom and Gomorrah and the 5 cities were exceedingly wicked and sinful against the Lord. And they provoked the Lord with their abominations, and they strengthened and acting abominably and scornfully before the Lord. And their wickedness and crimes were in those days great before the Lord. And all the people of Sodom and Gomorrah went 4 times in the year with their wives and children and all their belongings to them, and they would rejoice. There was timbrels and dances. And in the time of rejoicing they would all rise and lay hold of their neighbors' wives and some of the virgin daughters of their neighbors, and they enjoyed them. And each man saw his wife and daughter in the hands of his neighbor and did not say a word.
That makes no sense.
Speaks volumes. Speaks volumes.
It makes a lot of sense.
Yep. So now you can see what was going on in there. So the book of Yasher gives a vivid display of what was going on in Sodom and Gomorrah at that time.
That explains why Lot offered his
Yeah,
2 daughters.
Yep.
Because I never could put that one together. Okay.
So
Now
we
it
find,
makes sense.
Lut sitting at the gate, not in the tent. Now, see here again, tent is Torah. He's sitting at the gate. Gate in Bible is all where transactions took place. That's
Right.
where, the lawyers of the day would be sitting at the gate. So he's not in tent. He's not in Torah. He's not doing what he's supposed to be doing. He begs them to go to their servants' houses to spend the night, but they wanted to spend the night in the square. So they went to Lut's house where they made a feast for them. Like, okay, we'll feed them and that will be it. My question on this thing, and makes me wonder, it says, he made the feast, Lut did. Where was Lut's wife? Because we just read when, they came to Abraham and Sarah, Sarah made the cakes. Where is it mentioned here about that? It's a big difference, what happened there. After they ate, they were ready to go to bed for the night when the townspeople came a-knocking at the door, wanting the young men. This was young and old people. Lut even offered the young daughters, but they refused. Can you imagine offering your own daughters?
I still don't understand that. Why do you say now it makes sense, Dr. Larry?
Because what Shay said was they were so promiscuous that when they got together, they would literally exchange their wives and daughters with other men. And so now it shows to me that Lot, or Luke, if you want to call him that, fell into the custom of the land by offering his 2 daughters, thinking that would pacify the crowd who wanted the angels. So I'm just saying he adopted so much over time to become. He really became a sodomite. That's what he really became. Remember, they had to practically drag him out of there.
Right. So Lut even offered his young daughters, but they did not want them. They wanted the men. So the men would have to pull these men, the men that were there would have to literally pull Lut back into the house. And the men were struck with blindness. God struck them with blindness. Lut was told to remove all from his house because Hashem had sent them to destroy the city. But Lut did not want to leave. Even after all the men had told him. It's like, really? What more does it take? So the men finally said, this is it. This man ain't going to listen. The only way we're going to do is we're going to end up grabbing him. Like Dr. Larry said, So they grabbed him by his hand. They grabbed Lut's wife by the hand and the daughters by the hand, and they took them out of the city where they were told to flee for their lives and not to look back. That was the one thing they told them, do not look back. Because when you look back, you're longing for what's back there. So what happens? Lut's wife turned and back as they were fleeing. This is another Hebrew idiom meaning she lagged behind. Which means, in God, you cannot lag behind. You don't want to be in the tail end. So when she lagged behind, she got out of the mold of everybody moving, being in step. Like when you walk with somebody, you're in step with them. And, lagging behind, everybody's ahead. So she turned around and she looked, and that was it. She turned into a pillar of salt. So Lut was in Soar, meaning insignificance, located in the southeast corner of the Dead Sea, when the Lord rained down the brimstone and fire. Brimstone in Hebrew is goreth, it means judgment. And fire is ash, A-S-H in Hebrew, it means fire and flames. So Lut would leave Zoar and would dwell in the mountains along with his 2 daughters. And the older sister told the younger sister that was not a man on the face of the earth to come into us. So they decided to get their father drunk and lay with him. This should all sound familiar because somebody else did the same thing, didn't they? Noah. So, remember when we talked about Noah? We talked about drinking wine was associated with sexuality. And the vineyard is a place of lovemaking. So, drinking wine was a prelude to intercourse. We talked about that with Noah. And this is what we see here again with the daughters. They get Lut drunk and lay with him. And this was done 2 nights in a row in the hopes of preserving generations. And all this was done supposedly without Lut knowing it. Now, you can't tell me the second night, first night maybe, but the second night, really, was he that stupid not to figure out what was going on? So the older daughter, she's going to have a son by him, and his name's going to be Moab.
That's good.
Yeah. Means of his father. The younger had a son and named him Ben-Ami, meaning father of the Ammonites. That's who he's going to become, and his name means son of my people. So he was the progenitor for the Ammonites. So you have the Moabites and the Ammonites. And guess what? Yeshua would come out of this lineage, don't you figure? Ruth was a Moabitess,
That's right.
okay, who would come through King David, which is Naamah, who would marry King Solomon and produce a son called Rehoboam. It's interesting how everything all weaves in there. In Genesis chapter 20, we find Abraham on the move again. This time he sojourns to Gerar, where Abimelech, which is the king of Gerar, ruled. Abraham would have Sarah once again pose as his sister. But this
Hasn't
time,
he learned his lesson yet?
no.
No, neither does his son.
History just keeps repeating itself over and over and over. This time Abimelech had a dream in which he found out that Sarah was a married woman. In the dream, he was instructed to return her. If not, you and all that is yours will die.
That's pretty strong.
Mhm.
Nice.
So in Genesis
I believe
20,
that he was shaking it, shaking
Yeah,
after
yeah.
that happened.
I don't know whether I'd like to
But
get a
Isaac
dream like
did the
that.
Same dumb thing, his son.
Chapter 20, verse 7 says, "But now return the man's wife, for he is a prophet, and he will pray for you, and you will live. But if you do not return her, be aware that you shall surely die, you and all that is yours." So guess what? Abraham's going to pray for God to hear Abimelech and his wife and his needs. Chapter 21 goes into the birth of Isaac. At this point, Abraham is 100 years old. When Isaac's going to be born, his name means laughter, and Abraham's going to circumcise him 8 days after he was born, and after he's weaned, they're going to have a great feast. Verse 9 starts with Hagar and Ishmael, and I found some interesting information which I never knew. It's going to be interesting because here it says, Sarah saw the son of Hagar, the Egyptian, whom she had bore to Abraham, mocking. So he's going to be mocking Isaac. And this is why Sarah was not happy, because he was constantly mocking and making fun of Isaac.
And he was what, like 10 or 12 years older than him?
Right. So, Hagar, whose name means flight, and Ishmael said, "That's it, I'm not happy with you." And Abraham comes along and said, "Do with as you see fit." So he's just telling Sarah to do whatever she wants. So she said, "That's it, goodbye, I've had enough of you." So Abraham was really distressed over that, because rightfully, in lineage-wise, when you look at it, your firstborn is the person that's in line to inherit everything. So here's Ishmael should have inherited everything from Abraham. But God spoke to him and told him he was to do whatever Sarah wanted him to do. So Abraham gave Hagar bread and water and sent them to the desert of Beersheba. Beersheba is the wealth of 7 oaths, that's what it means. And was not long before the water runs out, and she puts Ishmael under one of the trees, walked away where she would see him, because she didn't want to see him die. She lifted up her voice and wept. God heard her cry and told her that he would make a great nation of him. He would become a great archer, marry an Egyptian woman, and live in the desert of Paran, which means place of caverns. In chapter 22, God will test Abraham when he tells him to take Isaac to Mount Moriah, to one of the mountains, for an offering. So early in the morning, he saddles his donkey, took 2 men with him, and Isaac. Verse 4 says, on the 3rd day, Abraham saw the place from afar. A far tradition says that it was the Mount of Olives where this took place, and where Yahweh cut the blood covenant back in chapter 25. 22, 6 through 9. And Abraham took the wood for the offering, placed it on Isaac his son. He took his hand, the fire, and the knife, and the 2 of them went together. Then Isaac spoke to Abraham, his father, and says, "Father," and he said, "Here I am, my son." And he said, "Here is the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for the offering?" And Abraham said, "God will seek out for himself the lamb for the offering, my son." And the 2 of them went together. They arrived at the place which God had spoken to him, and Abraham built the altar there and arranged the wood. He bound Isaac his son and placed him upon the altar atop the wood. Abraham stretched out his hands and took the knife to slaughter his son, and the angel of Hashem called to him from heaven and said, "Abraham, Abraham." And he said, "Here I am." And he said, "Do not stretch out your hand against the lad or anything to him for now. I know that you are a God-fearing man, since you have not withheld your son, your only son, for me." And Abraham raised his eyes and saw, behold, a ram, afterwards caught in the thicket by its horns. So Abraham went and took the ram and offered it up as an offering instead of his son. And so you find that. So Isaac at this point is 37 years old. So you always picture this as, when you think he took him like a child, 10, 12 years old. Now he was 37 years old.
And Abraham is how old?
Yeah. When he offered. And again, if he's going to offer him at 37 years old as an offering, and this is going to be a Korban Olah, which is an elevation offering. That, again, we'll get into.
Wonder why age 37 and not 30.
Interesting.
Everything else I've been to 30.
Yeah. But this is 37. So Abraham built the altar, arranged the wood, bound Isaac, placed him on top of the wood. And, of course, just as he was about to kill him, the ram was caught in the thickets by the horn. Abraham would offer the ram instead of Isaac. And from there, Abraham will return to Beersheba, the well of the seven oaths. This chapter is going to end with Abraham's brother Nahor's wife bearing 8 children, and as well as his concubine bearing 4 more children. And so next week we'll start with Sarah. But the interesting thing that I found out, which I did not know, from the Midrash, when you go in and study the writings and the Jewish writings, in the Midrash they talk a lot about Sarah, and they talk a lot about Hagar. There's a lot about Sarah in the Bible. Hagar's, there's not a whole bunch about it outside that she was, Sarah's handmaiden. Well, come to find out, Hagar, according to the Midrash, was an Egyptian princess. She was given from Egypt to Abraham when they were in Egypt. So she wasn't just your run-of-the-mill, low-level person. She was a high-ranking person. She was the daughter of the king of Pharaoh of Egypt at that time.
Oh, wow.
And her name means this is the reward. Now, it's interesting because when Sarah dies, Sarah dies shortly after this Mount Moriah incident with Isaac, according to the book of Yasher, that, she was so distraught, when, because she thought that Isaac, that Abraham had killed Isaac, and she was just really distraught over the thing, and she's going to die in this next chapter that we do next week coming up. And she was so distraught. So later on you find after she dies that Abraham's going to marry. And he's going to remarry a girl by the name of Keturah. I always thought that was a totally different woman. But the Midrash says that when Sarah died, Isaac went to look for Hagar, because Hagar was a godly woman, had never married, had kept herself, just believed and trusted and believed. She had faith. They said she really had a lot of faith. He goes and finds her, Isaac does, brings her back.
Isaac or Ishmael?
No, Isaac.
Isaac went to find her.
Isaac went to find her because she had never married. She'd been living in the same vicinity that Ishmael had been living. Brings her back to Abraham. Abraham marries her. And she, instead of being Hagar, she's Keturah. The name was changed. This is what the Midrash says. So, Isaac would, bring her back and they would marry. And then when you read, she's going to have, by Abraham, like 6 or 8 more kids. By Abraham. But they're saying she was the same person. Sort of makes sense to me because when you look at the name changes, like Sarah's name was changed from Sarai to Sarah, Abraham. And then, as I was talking to Larry, when you get into the Bible, there's a lot of people that you think are different people, and they're same people, or their name is changed. But that's what the Midrash says, that Keturah is Hagar, that Abraham married Hagar.
Good
Okay.
teaching, Dave. Good teaching.
All right, that's that for the night.
Yeah.